Arbor Human Rights Commission. We start with a roll call from Denise Janess.
Good evening. This meeting will be broadcast live on CTN Cable Channel 16, ATT Channel 99, and online at the a2gov.org/watchctn. Public commentary can be made in person or by calling 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099. Enter meeting ID 996-9403-7874. Commissioner Winkler,
Here.
Commissioner Cowan,
Here.
Chair Stanbaugh,
Here.
Commissioner Dent, absent. Commissioner Cass will be absent today. Commissioner Ghazi Edwins is absent today. Commissioner Sova,
Here.
Councilmember Nelson,
Here.
Councilmember Redina,
Here.
Vice Chair Garber.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Is there anyone standing for public comment? I see no one here.
No, I don't have anybody online.
Well, in that case, we will go on to the agenda. You've all had a chance to look at the agenda. Are there any additions or discussion? Any additions? Changes? Subtractions? In that case, can we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I motion to approve the agenda.
I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Minutes for the August 10th meeting. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I so move.
Second?
I second.
Discussion? I hear no discussion. In that case, are we ready for a vote? I call a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Okay. The next thing we have to talk about is outside group work. Travis and Elizabeth, anything from City Council that we should know about? Elizabeth? Nothing?
I'll let Travis answer.
Travis?
I just have one thing that would be potentially relevant to this body if it passes. I know that at our administration committee meeting this week, there was some discussion of reflecting our masking policy to be reflective of CDC guidelines. And so if Washtenaw County were in high, we would mandate masks at meetings, and if we were below that, we would potentially loosen that restriction and make it more voluntary for folks. There was some discussion of also obviously reflecting that policy at commission meetings as well, but allowing commissions to kind of set their own standards if folks were more comfortable or less comfortable. So that might be something that is coming. I know that it was discussed at administration.
Thank you. We'll check that out for the next meeting and try to get some reading before the meeting as to how we do this. It'd be nice to be able to speak without a mask. However, we'll see. Facial recognition, Aiden and Travis. Do you have any updates?
Yeah, I also have an update there. Obviously, we have a new interim police chief. I have started that conversation with her and tried to kind of reignite some momentum around this to have her kind of involved in looking at what current policies are and working with us to develop something that is reflective of what the working group is trying to accomplish. And have also kind of re-looped in some of the initial community activists who were interested in this ordinance moving forward. And so we are trying to kind of reignite this conversation after it kind of stalled out previously. And so hopefully we will have another update for you here in the near future. I know that I keep saying that, but we are hoping that potentially we might start making some progress now with
Thank
some
you.
new stakeholders.
Great. Asian and African American Solidarity Picnic. Aisha Ghazi, who is one of the people who I guess, organized and established and ran this picnic, is not here, but she told me that she thought that there were somewhere between 250 and 300 people there, that it was a big success. I attended for a while, and I thought it was fabulous, and the food was very, very good, and the feeling was very nice. It felt very good. Akita spoke.
Yes, and
For the-
was also present, and I really felt that it accomplished its purpose in terms of, you know, we were there, could meet people, could see each other, and know that we're all, you know, working and living in the same community, looking at making the world better for everyone. And we share common cause, and I loved it. I walked away with a great feeling. It stayed with me all day.
Good.
I was really happy and hopeful that, you know, we can do more of those, and we don't just leave it to, you know, the committed few that put this together, but that, you know, we can make it bigger and keep growing it.
Yeah.
I want to be able to be one of the, you know, helpers next time, you know.
Had a very nice feeling. Aiden?
Yeah, it was a fantastic event. It was just a picture of community. I left feeling very similarly to Kita, and I could even say hopeful for what we can do
Yeah.
as just a community, as one together. I think it was at a very pivotal time as we are deciding who our elected officials are and how we're moving forward, again, just as a team, as a community, as one. And Kita, you give a very fantastic speech as well. She called to the HRC who we are, how to get a hold of us. That was really appreciated. The food was great. How could I not mention the food? It was fantastic. But just in general, it was a fantastic time, and it was just so Ann Arbor.
Right.
Yeah.
Linda?
I wasn't there, but I do want to give a thank you to Leslie for, at the last minute, putting together that flyer that I guess Kita and you handed
Yeah,
out.
we'll
about-
talk about that flyer.
Oh, okay, but still, I
Thank
mean,
you.
You did it for this purpose. Right now, we may fix it, make it better going forward.
Well, I printed 100 of them. I don't know, Aisha didn't get the final count, so I don't know how many got passed out, but we tried. And we were there. Travis?
Yeah, just briefly, I also mentioned, I don't know if everyone was still there when this happened because he came relatively late into the picnic, I think, but Michigan Supreme Court Justice Bernstein also dropped by and reminded us that this November we also have the opportunity to elect our first African-American female justice of the Michigan Supreme Court. And so everyone should pay attention to their Supreme Court races and know that they can't just vote straight ticket and get
Please
those races.
don't.
They have to pay extra attention to the judicial races.
Thank you. Anybody else who was there? Well, this is the second annual one. There will probably be another one next year, and it's really worth attending. I'm glad I went. Okay, following up on HRC work. Complaints. Jude and Pam, do you have anything to say about the complaints about violations to the NDO? Just sort of generally, what kinds of issues we're talking about?
I don't have anything new to report, really, no.
I don't have any, I don't have a new report, but a new complaint, but an ongoing one that is disability-related. It's a little protracted because of non-cooperation.
Disability.
Yes. So I reached out to the parties again this week, and if there is no movement, then I may recommend that the complaining party address their concern at a higher level than what we would do.
Yeah. A lot of some of our complaints have to do with disability. Some of them have to do with employment. And we have also complaints about housing. Linda, you have one you've been dealing with. Or
Yeah,
two,
we've had a
actually.
couple of fair chance access to housing ordinance complaints recently. Both were handled by educating the landlords about the law, and they were pretty easily resolved. Although we do need to further investigate Zillow's practices around their application process, their online application process, and the automatic background checks that involves. So we will do that.
We've been getting lots of people who are helping us find places where people don't know about that law, and we're helping to educate them. And maybe more, we'll see. We had a complaint at one point that had to do with the Washtenaw County Jail, and we have no jurisdiction over the jail, so we didn't do anything, but it did spur us to take a tour of the jail. Pam, do you want to talk a little bit about what we found?
So Leslie and I met with, there were several people who actually joined us on the tour. The tour began in the conference room that they use. A lieutenant who will be retiring in 10 months gave us an overview of what every employee at the jail is responsible for adhering to. There's a set of rules and regulations and procedures. It kind of summarizes itself in being treating everyone with dignity and respect. That includes staff, individuals who are brought there who are either voluntarily or involuntarily. And so we spent a good hour reviewing that information that they presented, very comprehensive. And then we were given a tour. We met individuals who are employed by the county jail from the outside to assist those who work there or who are mandated to be there. Then we were given a tour of several of the areas of the jail. There was an older part that we were shown and given a history of what used to govern. And we met the executive assistant there as well to the sheriff. We all know her as Kathy Wyatt. And then we were taken to a newer part of the jail and shown the difference from what used to be and how they treated individuals who were required to be there, and then what they currently experience or enjoy. The allegations in the complaint were that the jail is severely understaffed and that individuals are treated badly. While we toured the premises, we did not see that. We were told of instances of types of behavior that they would have to deal with on a regular basis and how they had procedures in place to address those concerns. While we were there, we heard noises, and we asked and inquired about what that meant, and they explained that there are certain sections of the jail where they have to engage in certain types of restraint to not only protect the individual who may be engaging in behavior that is harmful either to themselves or to others. And so while we didn't witness or observe that, we certainly heard louder noises that were emanating from a certain area in the jail. Long story short, we came away, I did, and I'm sure Leslie did too, with a mindset that some of the concerns that were expressed in the complaint, which was anonymous, did not appear to have any basis in fact. We did not witness or observe what was alleged in the complaint. Not saying it didn't occur, just saying we didn't see it. We didn't observe it. It certainly wasn't shared during our over, I think we were there over 2 hours, weren't we, Leslie?
A long time,
Yeah.
yes.
And all of our questions were answered. We believe they were forthright and concise. They acknowledge the discrepancies, for example, the short-staffedness that they have. What struck me was that they were very emphatic, and it seemed to be evident in their demeanor and the behavior and what we saw of others who either joined us on the tour or were willing to share comments of their own experiences. Like many organizations, they are not unique in being understaffed, but they have a certain criteria where they don't accept just anyone who makes application for employment. And I found that to be very open and honest because they learned from past mistakes of what they used to do and what they currently do. I came away with the impression that they truly make an effort to demonstrate the humanness of all of the persons employed or who may find themselves there either with or against, for their own good or against their own wishes. They acknowledge that they're not perfect, and who of us are, but that they are striving on a daily basis to correct any deficiencies that are brought to their attention and to be proactive in certain things, to incorporate things that would be ideal not only for the staff, but for those who find themselves there for whatever reason. I felt that the answers that I asked, they speak a lot of alphabet acronyms, so I had them define what that was and share what it meant. They were very forthcoming in that. And then they acknowledged that even though they have made progress, they still have a long way to go. And they're willing to put forth the effort and do what it takes to ensure that they demonstrate what they say, not only what they say, but what they are doing on a regular basis. And so overall, I felt a positiveness upon leaving, and I felt that they weren't necessarily trying to hide or avoid or ignore even some of the concerns that had been expressed in the complaint. They also extended an open invitation for any and all of us to join, to visit on a regular, and to see. They made a point of saying, we're not trying to hide anything from you, and I got the impression that they weren't. I don't think that they were deliberate in trying to avoid any areas. They did acknowledge that certain areas were off limits or were closed, and in part that was due to understaffing. But for the most part, I believe that what we saw, what we witnessed, what we observed was contrary to what had been defined in the complaint. And that would be my assessment of the tour. And while we're not investigating the complaint and have no intentions of doing so, my personal opinion is that some of the allegations, if not most of them, did not have merit. They just didn't appear to be evident. And from what I observed, I'm not certain that if an investigation is commenced, I don't know that what was alleged in the complaint would bear fruit to resulting in a positive outcome, at least for the complaining party.
I too was impressed, but I also was aware that we saw the people who were less dangerous, less, charged with less serious crimes. And I was impressed that they talked about correction versus punishment, and they were trying to get people their ability to reenter. Well, they spent a lot of time and interest in that, and energy thinking about how to do it. I think they'd like to work with us if we could find something. I mean, they really do want to make it better. I think I did forward the complaint to people who could do an investigation, and I think they should, not because it's an emergency, but because investigations are always important because they're down a lot of staff. And there might be a learning possibility, and I don't expect them, I don't know what they'll find. I mean, you just don't know. It's not our jurisdiction, we can't do anything about it, but we could more people could take a tour, and we might find some ways that we can connect and be helpful to work together. So it was very interesting. And if people want to do it, let me know, and I'll arrange it. And it was fun. I mean, it was very, you left feeling very good about it. And then you had to come think, well, I really don't, I have to watch the conclusions I draw from this, but
Yeah.
it looks good. And it did look staged, it just, you just don't know if you haven't seen the whole thing. And been there for a month, too, probably working there to know for sure.
I mean, I want to add that, but the picnic this past weekend sort of emphasized to me the fact that we were having lunch with folks from Ypsilanti and Pittsfield Township, and we, I think, really should look at broader coalitions and collaborating, right?
That's on my agenda.
Yes.
Later.
Okay, I'm just saying, that came to mind.
Right. No,
Great.
you're right. Okay, so I'm just going to follow the agenda. Trespass. We have a meeting coming up. Linda, you want to just mention what it's about and what we're trying to do?
Well, we are finally this working group that includes some HRC members and Lieutenant Patrick McGuire from the Police Department and Deputy City Attorney Ariane Slay to revise the trespass notice, really to start from scratch and make it much more user-friendly and clear, and hopefully do something about the 1 year always duration of the trespass notice. So we're going to meet tomorrow morning and hopefully make some progress.
Good. Looking forward to it. Okay, outreach. Now we can talk about the flyer, and I do have copies of the flyer, I think, yes, which I think you've all seen, but in case you haven't, let's see. I was going to pass this out before the meeting.
I have one.
Okay.
Judah? I'll give one to Liz.
As Linda pointed out, we... Yeah, right, yeah. We had a flyer. We have a very age-old flyer that we've gone to for many years. And after seeing the one that Diana had given us last time, we were talking about the need for a new flyer. And she had mocked one up. It wasn't fully done, but it was mocked up. And it looked a lot better than ours, and it made some sense. Yes, talking to the mic. And so I took the flyer that she had mocked up and made a few changes and got together with Diana and Linda, and we finalized it, but you might want to have some changes because we've got other things coming up where this flyer might come in handy. And we'd like a good, colorful, nicely stated in English flyer. So, any comments about this flyer, which I hope you read before? Do you want to take a few minutes just to look at it? Or do you want to come back, just come back to me another time with the...
Well, my one comment is that I'd like to see larger text.
Okay.
You mean in
Just
terms
in
of-
terms of ease of,
You mean in
reading.
terms of the font?
Font size?
Particularly on the white portions.
Okay.
I think the purple portions are fine.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, I just would like to point out that this was done in a kind of rushed way.
Yes.
I think we can take a little more time and make it better, and definitely, yeah, making it more readable would be a big part of that. Yeah, bigger font and less blank space, and we should think about substantively what other information we want to convey on a one-page sheet.
Yeah.
We can look at our older flyer and compare it. But I mean, I think this is a great start. I don't think there's a lot more that's needed, but maybe we could all just look at it and send in some comments.
Well, please look at it and make some changes if you want. I don't want it to have too many words, so I don't want it to have an awful lot more information.
You know, it's possible, too, that we need more than one flyer.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Yes, that's true. But this is just who are we and what,
Yeah.
we've got your back, and here's our phone number, call us, I think is what we need for this.
Yeah.
But we will need more. So please get back to me with that. We're going to need something soon. Other outreach. I sent you, we've got a program going on with University of Michigan School of Social Work. One class this time. With Aisha in 2020, it was two classes. This is one class, 4 groups, so it's a lot less project. But it is a research project for them where they do research on a human rights kind of issue, an issue that we're interested in. They scope out the problem, and they scope out what has been done or what could be done to mitigate the problem. And they're very interesting. It's kind of a win-win for us and for the social work students, because both of us are getting a lot out of it. They came up with 4, they're going to have 4 groups, and they've got 4 titles of things they want to explore, and they've asked for some input from us, so I sent that to people, and some of you have already given me feedback, and that's terrific. Please give me feedback, say tomorrow, so I can get back to the professor and tell her what we want to do. I think that'll be interesting. If there's something you're especially interested in, or you want to say, feel free to call on me anytime, or especially if it's something you feel especially interested in or especially knowledgeable about. And I will pass on your name, and I might pass on your name even if you don't do that. But if you're interested in mentoring these people or helping them in some way, that would be great. They're excited, and that's wonderful. And maybe they can come up with definitely some research we can use, and maybe some solutions that they've seen in other municipalities that have worked there. So that's one thing. The second thing is, Diana and I think it was fall of this year, or the end of spring term, I guess it is. We got together with 2 people who are from the LSNA LSNA's government. And they want to put on a presentation to students about Know Your Rights. What do we need to know about the city? If we go out in the city, who do we call if we have problems? What are our rights in this city? And Diana and I were very interested. We'd like a few other people, some of them younger than we are.
Leslie, I'd be happy to assist with that.
That would be great.
Holler back to my student government days and use my youth, hopefully, to good benefit.
I like that. We're going to meet with them soon because they're ready to start planning that presentation, what content they will need. And I suspect we probably will have to partner with U of M police, and that would be useful too, because we don't know for sure who does what, and that would be a good way to find out. And then Keita, you were talking, and you just sort of said it, how we don't know the people who are on the other human rights commissions, and there aren't that many in our county, and what we can do to partner with them, or to help them in some way, or collaborate in some way. At least we ought to know who they are.
Right, because I know there is an Ypsilanti Human Relations Commission, but I've never, we've never worked with them, or what their
We did
lead
years
agenda.
ago, but then it came
No,
and
I
went.
just meant since
Yes.
I've been on.
Yes.
I feel now like Aidan saying, I don't know what happened, years ago. But it would be a wonderful thing to get together and really look at what are their key you know, projects. And
Yeah.
then there's the rest of Washtenaw County. I know that we've got equity and inclusion officers pretty much now in all the cities and in the county. And I think there are opportunities to really collaborate on some things.
Okay. Does anybody want to take that as a task, just to find out who these people are?
I would like to.
Terrific. Thank you. Now we come to a proposed ordinance amendment. This has to do with alternative IDs that particular ID would be the Washtenaw County ID.
Oh, are we ready to talk about the
I
ID?
think we are.
All right.
And
Okay.
we talked a little bit about it before. Keita has drafted, and I sent you a copy of a draft of a resolution and a draft of wording for amendment. And all of you who've been here a long time know that it takes a long, long time for us to, that it starts with one draft and then we iterate a lot. Which means we try to include everybody. We try to make it right before we give it to city council, and it takes a long time. And this one's got some complexities, and it looks actually deceptively easy. And the more I talk to Keita about it, the more I realize how important it is and how complex it is and how much I don't know about it. So I asked Keita to talk a little bit about how she came to the idea in the beginning about the need for a Washtenaw card, ID card, what kinds of things they're finding when people don't accept that card, and why it's so important for us to have an amendment that doesn't allow discrimination because they don't have another kind of an ID, that they have that ID instead. And then we can ask Keita questions about what she's got so far and move on to the next iteration, which will come soon.
All right, I want to start prior to the paperwork that we sent out. And I want to take you all back to the release of the 9/11 Commission's recommendations that states begin to restrict access to state IDs and driver's licenses. And part of that occurred in Michigan in 2008. And original documents, foundational original documents, began to be required of everyone. And if you could not prove legal presence in the country, you were excluded from having access to a driver's license or a state ID. We'll put that aside for a moment. What happened, however, is that the legislature's requirement for original foundational documents like birth certificates incorporated inadvertently, I think, a catch-22, which is they required you to have an original birth certificate to get a state ID or driver's license. But they also required other agencies in the state, required that you have a government-issued photo ID to get your birth certificate. And that was true for, I think I counted 30-something states. So that began to transpire. People's driver's licenses expired. So now I am an executive director. I'm sitting at my desk. It's 2012, and I'm not involved really in the ID movement. Staff called and said that they had a strange issue that they needed me to become involved in and resolve. My agency had been asked to help a woman who was approximately 75 years old. She was Caucasian, to to move from the hospital where she had been back home. And she had diabetes and needed a doctor's appointment. She had insurance. We discovered that the hospital had lost all of her original identification documents. She had nothing left. And so I contacted the Secretary of State's office, and after being passed from person to person to person and taking this for 3 days, I was finally told that there were no temporary IDs available, there were no emergency identification cards to be handed out, and there was no solution. I then contacted folks who work with undocumented folks because they're trying to get medical care for individuals without ID on a daily basis. And they told me, Packard Clinic, because they have such a big heart, will help anyone at any time. But I began to call other agencies to say, has anybody else run into this problem? And just by asking the question, I became the repository for all of these communities to say, yes, our folks are no longer being allowed to sign leases because landlords want a valid state ID to sign a lease with someone. I got calls that seniors were not being allowed to enter rehab facilities because they were also requiring government-issued ID. Food pantries were now requiring government-issued ID. Bank accounts that you had opened previously when your driver's license was valid, you could no longer access because now your driver's license had expired. And the list went on, and it continues to go on. People would go to work, stop in at the same store where they picked up a beer for 10 years, and all of a sudden, they wouldn't be served. They'd be refused. And that's when we began to realize the scope of the problem of denying all of these communities access to a government-issued ID card that would verify their basic information: who they are, their age, their address, where they live, this sort of fundamental data that people want to collect before they enter into a contract with you. This was never more than to say this legislation is overreaching, it's overbroad because it's excluding folks from a system that is necessary for them to access other fundamental goods. And we began to look into alternatives. We began to form a large task force composed of representatives from all of the affected communities. And I left out homeless and disabled folks. I mean, the list went on, it was huge. And the sheriff was also involved because law enforcement has a vested interest in being able to identify who's in this community. We had a task force, the county, at that point, chair of the county commission, Yusuf Rabi, and the clerk, Larry Kestenbaum, stepped forward and said, I know that this is a problem. It is in my wheelhouse because the county clerk's office, manages demographic information about constituents, and they manage birth certificates. So the work began. But it was interesting to me that whenever I gave a presentation, people always assumed that this was about the undocumented community. And yes, I believe that on a human rights level, you don't want anyone to live without utilities. You don't want parents to be unable to pick their children up from school. Not as a person, I don't believe we mean that. We don't want to create that kind of world, and that's why I was so vehement about we have to do something, because this has created a group, a vast group of second-class citizens and non-citizens. I mean, you know, without government-issued ID, you can't apply for a job because you can't complete the identity portion of the I-9. It's crazy. So, after, I think, 2 years of work, we looked into different solutions, and the task force and all of the communities agreed if law enforcement would accept it, then a local government-issued ID would meet their needs, because we'd done the research and we'd identified that most fundamental daily needs, like picking cough medicine up for your child, riding Amtrak, riding Greyhound, could be met. All of those requirements, buying a beer, could be met with a government-issued ID that specified, you know, the basic demographics and had your picture. Okay. So we proceeded, and the Washtenaw County ID was released in June of 2015. We were the 5th local government ID in the country, the 1st in the Midwest. Detroit followed. We developed an eligibility criteria system that was based on points, because different communities had different problems meeting the state's eligibility criteria. So, for instance, we refer to folks who cannot establish valid visa presence as undocumented, when in fact, most individuals that I worked with who were born outside the country have numerous original birth certificates and voter cards to establish their identity. It was folks, citizens born in the United States, who lacked those foundational birth certificates. Homeless folks, you know, where these documents are easily lost. Senior citizens where these documents have been lost. But because they went to the same places and did their business, you know, with the same bank, it was never a problem until 2008. And then, just because the staff knew you was no longer good enough. And it really rose to be what I recognized as a violation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 6, which states that everyone shall have the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was written shortly after the end of World War II. And some folks who were tormented in a less than extreme manner were stripped of their identification documents and then told, you cannot marry because you cannot prove who you are. You cannot travel because you cannot prove who you are. You cannot prove who your family members are. You cannot prove what you own. Simply by the stripping of documents, you were no longer able to even stand before a court. Eleanor Roosevelt chaired the committee that drafted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. She learned that in the United States, the Dred Scott decision established that no African Americans should ever be deemed a person or a citizen before the law. And she then championed that article. And it was established that this was a second means of preventing the creation of second-class citizens or residents. And I thought, this is what is happening, because there are folks who cannot accomplish some very daily, necessary, fundamental things. And so we organized it as a human rights campaign. And it passed in Detroit, and they have the Detroit ID, same eligibility criteria, same system, same points program. So if you don't have a birth certificate, you can use a different, like your social security card, to establish your identity. There are different ways of making 300 points. And because we were doing a lot of outreach to folks that could not meet the state's eligibility criteria, we borrowed heavily from the federal system for establishing identity, right? So none of what we request was invented out of whole cloth. We based it on other systems. And then Kalamazoo County also adopted it. So the 3 ID cards, Washtenaw counties, the Detroit ID, and the Kalamazoo County ID are all these human rights IDs, all created between 2015 and 2017. So for the last 10 years, sorry, my math is bad, 8 years, we've been watching to see how are we doing? Did we accomplish the goal? First, law enforcement has been fabulous, and they recognize the card, accept the card, caution folks that it is not a driver's license. However, they recognize, as we recognize, that people are going to pick their children up from school. They have no, that's just part of living, and they're going to go to work. But of course, they have to have them pull off the road, but they don't seize the card. This is their form of identification. Homeless folks have the card. People are no longer afraid to report crime because they can prove who they are to police. And that had been a problem even when they or their children were the victims of crime. We had teenagers report that their fathers were sometimes afraid to leave the house because they had no ID, and should anything happen to them, no one would be able to tell their families. I mean, it's gut-wrenching when you think about living with that inability to tell people who you are and establish your right to be there. So it has been successful in terms of helping people interface more comfortably with law enforcement. It has been really successful in enabling people to access utility services, municipal services, county services, and birth certificates. It has been very successful in helping people apply for jobs. In fact, the one, I think we did a survey, 73% of all folks that applied for the ID used the card to apply for jobs. So it was successful in that regard. It was not successful in enabling individuals, particularly folks from the Latinx community, to access some things like service at a restaurant when they order alcohol, a bottle of wine. The ID is not accepted, even if they've got gray hair. Housing, if you are not Latino, there's a separate tier of I would call it, where people feel deputized, let's say that, to police and to surveil, right? So I question whether you have a right to be here in this country, therefore I'm not going to sell you what I don't think you deserve because you maybe shouldn't be here. That kind of deputization, I mean. So less successful in that regard, and really unsuccessful in restoring people's ability to interact with certain institutions with dignity, like banks. I've been called any number of times and asked to accompany people to the bank And when one individual had a mental illness, the banker simply wouldn't do business with him. I had to take his power of attorney in order to pull retirement money out of his account and move it into a disability trust so that he could qualify for Medicaid. There are things that I see that I would like to address, because I know that the regulations and the state statutes and the federal statutes do not mandate the identification cards that vendors and businesses are telling people are required. And it is almost impossible for me to visit every pharmacy and enable folks to access cough syrup. And I think that this becomes more like source of income discrimination, in that, just like source of income discrimination, housing subsidies were provided to lower and moderate income families to enable them to access housing in Ann Arbor. But it required a public-private partnership. The government could help provide the subsidy, but the landlords had to accept it. And when they didn't, we added it to the non-discrimination ordinance. And I think there are certainly situations where it is the same, where it is type of ID discrimination. It is a government-issued ID. There are places where the federal government says, you can sign the I-9 if you are issued an ID from a local, state, federal government entity, as long as it is a photograph. And why that is not able to also entitle you to an adult beverage, when the state law in Michigan is that it needs to indicate your age, right? There's some intervention, some human rights intervention that will help, I think, create the kind of community that we all want. And so I would like us to begin to look at how we might be able to do that. And so I'm requesting that we work at groups to look at maybe amending the non-discrimination ordinance to include type and proof of identity.
Questions?
Thank you.
That's a good job, I thought. Questions? Did you all read the,
No, I'm asking you, can you?
oh, did you read the resolution, which sort of summarizes all this? I mean, I'm wondering if you have questions about what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Well, you know what I'd actually ask? I would actually ask that the work group get to start from the beginning, because that resolution starts from, let's look at building a bridge, right? A public-private bridge that can help this ID accomplish its purpose. When I think the work group needs to begin with, here are all the populations affected. Here are all of the statutes that I have researched, so that people have some confidence in its validity. So if we could hold off on this resolution,
Okay,
that would be good.
good. We've got a group that has volunteered to work with Kita. Denise has offered to create a Zoom and schedule the meeting.
Thank you.
So are we ready to let this group go to work? We've got a good start. Thank you very much, Kita.
Yeah, I'd just
Very
like to
interesting.
say thank you again for all your work on this.
Yeah.
and creating the idea in the first place, and then seeing what we can do to protect it.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
I don't know if you guys have been readers of Eleanor Roosevelt, but she was asked 10 years after the passage of the Declaration of Human Rights, where do human rights begin? And she said, in small places close to home. Right? Because it is in our communities where everyone expects and looks for equal treatment. And to me, that was all the motivation I needed. Like, okay then, let's go.
Well, this is why we're here. And I'm proud of all of us. I think this is wonderful.
Right? Yes, that's what we were all doing.
Yeah. Is there any new business? Any commissioner communications? Any more discussion? Well, in that case, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
Second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.